El impacto de la
Ahora tú dale
simulación
cómo
en la
está.
seguridad del paciente, con el doctor Yasuharu Okuda.
Thank you so much for the invitation to present at CIMex. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. Again, I apologize for not being there. Very delighted to be able to present to you all. My focus is going to be on the impact of simulation for patient safety. And to be able to give my story, I think it's important to give you my perspective of why I got into simulation. And then it can help sort of give you an understanding of my focus around patient safety and using simulation. So the reason I got into simulation was I've been doing simulation for about 20 years now. And back when I was in training, 20 years ago, I trained during the time of C1, Do One, Teach One, where when I was an intern in New York City, I was called to see a patient in the emergency department, elderly lady who needed central line due to sepsis. And my resident or my senior supervisor, I called to get his assistance, and he basically said, you know, I've already shown you how to put a central line in a couple of days ago, and you don't need my help. You put a central line in yourself. And so back 20 years ago, we didn't question authority. And so I was very uncomfortable, but I nervously proceeded to put the central line in. And as I'm guessing most of you are clinical, from a clinical background, or at least simulate clinical backgrounds. And so you know that, you know, the goal is to put it into dark blue blood and not red blood. And so I proceeded to place the central line in, got a flashback, which was dark blue, which I was very excited about, nervously threaded my guide wire and put the central line in, and ultimately everything looked great. But then I looked when I was cleaning up, and the guide wire, which is what's shown here, was missing. And as you all know, if you put a central line in or teach central lines, you're always told to never let go of the guide wire. Fortunately, I was able to remove everything, and the guide wire was still sticking out of the skin. I was able to pull it out, and it prevented potentially serious situation and complication. And it was at that time that I reflected and said, you know, there's got to be a better way to teach our medical students and residents, trainees on procedures, as well as other things that we teach in medicine. I think if anybody here has done sports or music, you know that we practice with deliberate practice before going in for performance. And so I've really spent my last 20 years focusing on the use of simulation for our performance, which is patient care. A little other about my background. So I spent many years at the Icahn School of Medicine, Mount Sinai. My focus originally was on medical students and residents. I'm an emergency physician, so my goal was maybe if I can train students or residents early on in their career, that they will be able to speak up, and they will have better ability to reduce errors in medicine. But I soon learned that, you know, a physician is one of a small part in a healthcare team. And, you know, regardless of how much I spent training medical students and residents, it wasn't enough. It wasn't going to make a true impact. And so from there, I went to the New York City public health system, New York City Health and Hospitals, which is the public city hospital system for New York. We have 11 hospitals there. And my focus was on training healthcare teams using simulation, focused around quality and safety. And the simulation center at that time reported to the chief quality officer, which if you look at different simulation programs, they all, report differently. Some are under education, some are under workforce development. In New York, it was under quality safety, which was great. And so I proceeded to build training focusing on the most risky areas, such as maternal fetal outcomes, high risk procedures, and high risk deliveries. Then from there, I proceeded to Department of Veteran Affairs. I had a great opportunity to build a national simulation program, again focused on quality and safety efforts across our veterans health system, which is 150 hospitals that serve our U.S. nation's veterans. And again, much of my work was around reducing risk, improving safety, and improving quality using simulation. So about 4.5 years ago, I'm now in my current job and position. I'm with University of South Florida Health Center for Advanced Medical Learning and Simulation, which is in Tampa, Florida. Our mission is to create and provide experiential learning that improves clinical skills and patient care in our community and around the globe. And we've actually had some really great opportunities to support training for providers from South America, Central America. We've had physicians from Mexico come train and had really great experience collaboratively with those individuals, and that was for obstetrical procedures as well as disaster management. So our center is over 8,000 meters squared. We have 32 surgical skill stations, 18 outpatient clinic exam rooms, and multiple other clinical spaces. I was introduced as the president for the Society for Civilian Healthcare. Just wanted to remind the audience, our society is about 5,000 members. And our mission is to serve our members by fostering education, professional development, advancement of research and innovation. And ultimately, our purpose of the society is to serve a global community of practice, enhancing quality of healthcare. So again, my role in the society is really to advance the mission around quality and safety. So if as you heard my background, it's always really been around trying to improve quality and safety in hospitals and healthcare systems. And I know the prior talks this morning have focused on professionalism, debriefing, training and education for the future workforce, which is extremely important, which we do much of that at Camels, but a lot of my passion and efforts over my career has been in health systems education and training. So I'll spend the majority of the conversation talking about various opportunities for the use of simulation in hospitals and health systems. And I would say that I'm sure many of your hospitals are already doing components of this. This talk is really just to give a high-level overview of what's possible with patient safety and quality using simulation. I have articles to support most of these modalities and methodologies that I've used or have done at my own institution. So if you are interested in some of those, please reach out to me. So my first topic is really just around patient safety and quality. And so I'll talk about some of these examples. Most of these are pictures from my experiences over the years. And again, many of you are probably doing much of this. So the first one I'll talk about is the use of simulation for difficult conversations. And I think this is one that you all are probably very familiar with at the medical school, nursing school level training. You probably have experience or currently use simulated or standardized patients. In our medical school, we use this to both do formative training, so teaching our students how to do physical exams and communicate with our patients, some on the difficult conversations part. But in this example, this is more hospital based. And so, the idea of using actors or standardized patients, simulated patients to teach physicians, nurses on how to communicate issues around error, right? So if there are studies up in Michigan that shows that if you, at least in the US, if you have a patient error, let's say you gave the wrong medication and had an adverse outcome, maybe it was too much insulin or too much morphine. If you disclose the error early, it helps both with healing for patients, and it also reduces risk for the institution. So the chance for that individual to want to take legal action on your institution. And so there are many programs that utilize actors to help doctors, nurses, and other health professionals to have these difficult conversations. And some examples, again, are error disclosure, disclosure of poor outcomes or diagnoses, cancer, a death of a loved one, or conversations around procedurals and consent. Again, this is an area that I think some hospital and health systems use very well. In terms of return on investment, I think it can go a very long way. Another example of use of simulation for patient safety, new clinical procedures and or protocols. So we recently did training for the use of ECMO for our hospital, our level 1 trauma center here. And we've been doing ECMO for quite some time. But what's changed is that our nurses were going to take a much more active approach in managing the machine and the complications of extracorporeal bypass. And so, even though the physicians know how to use the machine and perfusionists know how to use the machine, they needed to train advanced nurses to do this. And so the use of simulation to teach both protocols around a new ECMO, as well as simulate normal and complications, and to get familiar with equipment, I think is critical. And I think as we advance in the future and technology continues to accelerate and be introduced in our hospital and healthcare environments, this is going to be more critical. I remember when I was 20 years ago, when I started with emergency medicine, video laryngoscopy, whether it's glide scopes or Storts, the video laryngoscope, were new. And I was already done with my training. And so at the time when they were teaching me, it was a person from the company teaching me how to use the device. And then I was supposed to be able to take care of patients. And obviously, that is not the best way to learn. So new clinical procedures or protocols, another example of a protocol is a new OR procedure, or maybe a new drug used for chemotherapy. So simulating those situations. Checklists. So this is very important and when I was working in the VA, we had some issues with wrong site procedures. And we come up with these checklists. We come up with, ways of ensuring the physicians and nurses are working together to identify the right person, the right procedure, and the right side. And even when we do that, we often have chest tubes placed on the wrong side or the wrong limb removed, and we still see these issues. And so, I think traditionally we've implemented these checklists or these tools through didactics and verbal training, maybe videos at most. In the VA, we created simulations focused on our high-risk procedures, which included thoracentesis. And so we created simulations to practice the checklists working in interprofessional teams. High risk, low frequency events, another very powerful use of simulation. This is probably something that you all are accustomed to, especially if you work in a clinical environment. As an emergency physician, we rarely see the need for a surgical crike But if you have that situation arise in that unfortunate event, you want to be prepared for it. And I think simulation is going to help you do that. Obviously, this is fire in the OR scenario, which organizations do simulations for. And I just want to show a video. Hopefully you can hear it. I can't hear it. Can you hear it?
We can hear. We only see.
You only see it. Okay. So I'll verbalize. So this is a simulation. Maybe if I take off my earplugs, you can hear it. This is a simulation where a ice hockey player went into cardiac arrest in their bench area. And, we see these with athletes, young, healthy athletes all the time where suddenly they collapse and it's a matter of time. They're usually in some sort of shockable rhythm. And it's really critical to get there, recognize it, and obviously apply the AEDs in time to save their life. And so we were asked by our local ice hockey team to help them with some simulation. And again, not sure if there's an easy way to make sure you can hear the volume. You are sharing sound. So let's see if this works. I'm guessing you probably can't hear this either.
No, we can't.
So this is a simulation that we did with Tampa Bay Lightning to simulate interprofessional team, both process and protocol, to practice these on-ice emergencies. And what was really interesting about the simulation was that the first time we went, the teams were not excited having our team there to run simulations. These were experienced paramedics, doctors, and athletic trainers, but they didn't necessarily want to be observed using simulation. So we went there. The first scenario we did was the scenario I described, where we simulated the player down in the bench, and it took them 5 minutes to identify that they were in a shockable rhythm and shocking the patient. As you all know, that's too long and they probably would not survive. When we were moving on to do the next scenario, they wanted to repeat that simulation, and in the repeat of it, they tried out some new processes, and they were able to get to shock by 2 minutes. So even one simulation, as you can see, especially as you change systems, can make a significant impact in their outcomes. So that was a high risk, low frequency rehearsal. I think we get simulation shows up in the news quite a bit because it's exciting, right? So if you were separating conjoined twins, I know this was done recently. Now they're starting to use virtual reality to simulate procedures, actual procedures that are very complex and require multiple teams. But traditionally, we've done mannequin-based simulation to rehearse very unique and difficult procedures. And again, as I mentioned, most recently, they started using virtual reality, which I think it's definitely virtual reality, augmented reality is a part of our future a tool set for simulation. So I'm very excited about that. Skills degradation and maintenance is another area that we have focused on. When I was with the Veterans Affairs, we worked closely with the military, and the challenge in the military is that the physicians and nurses would be deployed for 6 months or more. And if you're a proceduralist, like a GI doctor who does colonoscopies, and you haven't done it for 6 months or 8 months or 10 months, because you're in the military and you're taking care of trauma, and you come back to your clinical practice, you feel like a little uncomfortable going right back into doing these procedures. And so in the military, they're really working to figure out how they could train back up the skills that have maybe degraded through the use of simulation. So again, another really powerful use that could be utilized. And it may be, somebody's out on leave for 6 months for health reasons or other reasons. And to ensure your hospital health system, that individual or teams are well skilled and well prepared, sometimes getting some refresher training might be very helpful. And then handoffs, I think we are all familiar that handoffs are a very high cause for errors. And so practicing giving handoffs between the different teams, and this is, I think I have a video of it later, but pre-hospital, nursing, physicians, all involved in giving a handoff from cardiac arrest before and after. And latent safety threats. So when I was with the VA, we opened up 4 brand new hospitals. And as you can imagine, if you're opening up, whether you're opening up an emergency department, a wing of a hospital, a chemotherapy unit, dialysis unit, or a full hospital, it's quite frightful to think that you're going to start with, you're going to basically open your doors and you hopefully you designed everything safely, and then patients come in and utilize it and hope that nothing bad goes on. And so what we did in the VA, we opened brand new hospitals in New Orleans, Las Vegas, Denver, and Orlando. And we tested the hospital with simulation, both actors and mannequins, to test their protocols, their workflows, and identify any possible patient safety or latent safety threats. And when we're in Vegas, we identified over 300 possible threats. Some are severe, some are little, very small inconveniences. Others were pretty significant that could cause death or significant morbidity. And so, that was very powerful to the system. This is an example that we did where they actually, in their physical therapy, had a walking pool. And we simulated the whole thing with a patient walking in there, and then had the patient go into cardiac arrest, and they realized that they didn't know how to shut off and bring the patient out. The floor goes up and down. They couldn't get the water drain and everything brought up at the same time. And so they developed some protocols to ensure that in the chance that that would happen. And obviously there are concerns around water and defibrillators and things like that. In situ code, I think most hospitals are doing this. There have been many recent studies showing that hospitals that use in situ codes for training, and it's both for training, but also for human factors and evaluating the system, that they actually showed a reduction, an improved outcomes in terms of ROSC, so return of spontaneous circulation, in hospitals that use simulation in situ codes versus hospitals that did not. And so again, at this point, if your hospital is not using simulation for in situ codes, in my mind, it's practicing substandard of care, because there's evidence to demonstrate that it actually improves care. Procedural competency, this is another area where I feel very strongly, whether in this scenario, it's a permanent pacemaker placement or central line training, extremely important to utilize simulation to ensure competencies. And that includes checklists, making sure that they meet the checklist, and if they don't, that there's a remediation. And so at USF, we actually train about 100 residents in central line training using checklists to mastery learning every year prior to them taking care of patients in July. Team training and communication, I alluded to this. Again, this is an example. What we did was a handoff between pre-hospital, the ED, and these are actual doctors, nurses, and paramedics from our system. And our goal was to practice handoff of chest compressions from pre-hospital to in-hospital. And in trauma, we do this very well, but I don't think we do it as well as we should in these situations for medical resuscitation. So as you see, so there's a paramedic. She's doing great chest compressions.
Okay, so you got a 52-year-old
Brings the patient
male,
in.
witness cardiac arrest.
His compressions are
He
not
was
as
working
good.
out at the gym when he went down.
And then the goal
CPR
is
upon
to
arrival.
move,
When we got there,
stop,
he was in
give
VTAC.
report,
You got one
still
shock
doing
on
chest
scene.
compressions.
Right now, he's
And
still in
then
VTAC. You got one
also
CP on the way
previously,
there.
once
You
all
got
the
20 in the right AC.
moves the patient over,
All right, everybody
and then
clear?
resume chest compressions. And that was it. That was a simulation. And we did rapid cycle debriefing.
Today we
So
had
continued
one
to do
of
until
our
we got
graduate
the
medical
process
education
and
training
flow better.
programs, the emergency medicine program, come in to
So, and there are many others examples of the use of simulation for patient safety, just in terms of what is going on in the US. So if I had a magic wand, I would want to see simulation embedded in all requirements, both by regulators such as the Joint Commission, by board examiners like the American Board of Emergency Medicine or other board organizations. At the hospital level in the US, every hospital decides their privileging for procedures based off of their own standards. And so over my 20 years, nobody's actually ever observed my skill level for putting a central line in or intubation or any of those things. And I think some of them are low risk, but some high risk things, as I get older in my career, or as I, maybe I'm just supervising and I'm not actually doing the procedure, it's probably good for me to be able to demonstrate my competency. And if I'm a little off, then get remediation. It's not for punishment. It's just to ensure that we're all on the same level. And again, in the US, every hospital decides what that's going to look like. And then at the government level, reimbursement. I think some of these reimbursement models should be tied to outcomes related to the use of simulation. We are very far from being there in the US. In my role with the Society for Simulation Healthcare, I have formed a government advocacy task force that we're working to try to advocate for these types of areas, incorporation and simulation for training, similar to how often people describe the aviation industry, how they're using simulation for ensuring their safety. What the one positive is, about a year and a half ago, the Joint Commission finally embedded drills into their requirements. And so as of, I think, January of 2021, now if your hospital does obstetrics, so delivery, then the labor and delivery teams, so the obstetricians and the nurses and all the teams have to drill every 2 years, and the emergency teams also have to drill to demonstrate their skill level for things like preeclampsia, postpartum hemorrhage, et cetera. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but very slowly. Couple of other areas, just watching the time, couple of other areas that stepping outside of the quality and safety, but still related to hospital training, disaster preparedness, I think is very powerful use of simulation. So mass casualty incident training in the US, we have a lot of issues with this, and preparing our teams to take on lots of patients, I think is going to become more and more frequent. I think this is beyond the disaster drills that we do in hospitals, but true training. Another area is related to the climate crisis. This was an example of the simulation we did where we were simulating the evacuation of patients from a hurricane that hit Mississippi. And what we do if we had hundreds of patients coming in at different levels of illness, whether they're intensive care unit transfers or walking wounded, and we collaborated with multiple hospitals in our city to do a mass drill with the military. Chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear training, again, is becoming more real as we move into this next decade. And then obviously the pandemic, we were fortunate in that we were able to do training. We started training in the US. The major initial hit was in New York around March. For us, we didn't get hit in Tampa until like the summer. And so it allowed us to learn from lessons learned from both New York as well as Italy and other places to apply those to training. And we did multiple simulations in situ starting from April all the way until June.
Did
We
a
trained up
simulation
500
on what we call
doctors,
Code
nurses,
100
pharmacists,
here, which
respiratory
is
therapists
when you have a patient who has COVID-19
on
and
PPE,
they get critically
how they're
ill
going
or
to
need
communicate, how they're going to
interventions
ensure
and how that
safety,
kind of
how they're
shifts
going
from
to
what we're
intubate,
normally
do
doing.
chest compressions.
It's a change in who responds.
Again,
it's a change in how we
being
protect
careful of
ourselves when
airborne
we go in
precautions.
to
And
try and
what
save
that
somebody's
really
life
helped
when
our
they're in that
teams
kind
do
of episode.
was to feel more
Chemo Center
confident.
and what
Because
USF
back
training and what we
during
use
that
when we're in
time,
medical
everybody was
school and in
afraid,
residency
including myself,
training, we brought
of
that
the
here to
unknown.
TGH. It's such a
And so we
unique
were able to
opportunity.
utilize simulation to
safe
build
place to
confidence in our
practice
teams,
and-
which are
and be okay with
often
making
used
mistakes
as
and
an
figuring out
endpoint, which
how you can
I
improve your
don't
care,
necessarily
not just for
usually
patients, but also protecting
look
our
at
team
it
members,
as a
'cause,
high level of
we are human.
outcomes, but in
We're all working
this
together
case,
to
wherever
try and
it was such a
adjust
big
how
part
we do
of
our
the
job
day-to-day,
so we can take good care
confidence
of these
was
people
extremely
and
important.
be prepared for
And
the
through the
worst
simulations, we
and
were
hope
able
for
to
the
provide
best, and
safe
that
care
these
for our
measures that we're
patients
taking are
and
going to
keep our
help.
Watching these
providers
nurses and
clinical teams
providers
safe.
go.
So a few last considerations, interprofessional education. And so I think there's a lot of work going on in Mexico, in the US, and then internationally. I just returned from a meeting in Saudi Arabia where they're focusing on interprofessional education as well. And how does this fit into quality and safety? I think we still need to work at the early stages of training so that our future workforce is trained differently than I was. They're trained in a way that they're comfortable working together collaboratively across professions, and they know exactly what type of expertise each of their various professions have, so that when they get to finish training and education, they'll be much better professionals that are collaborative. Obviously, we need to do more interprofessional practice to get our teams up to speed so that they're working better and coordinating better together. And then finally, a focus on improving our diversity, equity, inclusion in our training. And so it's all of, similar types of training, but embedding components around diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as having very specific training to both empower teams, leaders, and followers to speak up and advocate for each other and advocate for our patients. And that is the end of my presentation. I look forward to if there are any questions.
Muchas gracias, doctor Okuda. ¿Alguien tiene algún comentario o alguna pregunta?
Hola, ¿cómo le va? Soy de Argentina, Carla Prudencio. Sí, me referenciaba que entendemos que la seguridad y la simulación, la seguridad del paciente y la simulación están íntimamente relacionadas. Entendemos que los hospitales y las universidades tienen que enseñar, están en la currícula o en el programa de educación de un hospital. ¿Qué hacemos las sociedades para ayudar a aquellos que no les llega la simulación? Y la otra era mi replanteo, si decimos que es importante, ¿no? ¿Cómo hacemos para que el Estado, el presidente, las autoridades nos ayuden? Porque a veces es trabajar hasta en forma separada a veces, uno va a los congresos, y escuchamos lo mismo, doctor Okuda, ¿no? ¿Qué pasa si esto es la vida de las personas? ¿Qué pasa que las sociedades tampoco no hacemos algo con el Estado, ¿no? Las autoridades mayores que deciden muchas cosas a nivel de cada país?
That's a great question. And I have a few answers. So first, I think, even in the US, we have issues where we have many facilities that have beautiful simulation capabilities and curricula, but there are many that don't, especially in smaller rural areas that just don't have the resources to stand up a simulation training capabilities. What we've been doing research and advocating for is through COVID, we learned that distance simulation or virtual simulation is a powerful tool. It's not necessarily going to replace face-to-face, but it's something that we can get simulation to rural or more remote areas. And then especially with the development of new technologies such as virtual reality and augmented reality, I think that's going to expand our capabilities to do remote or distance simulation. So I think there will be some technical or technological resources that are going to be developed that's going to help bridge some of that gap. And some of the challenges, as I've learned, is that you can't, these doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals, they don't have time to travel. Or if you have a medical school or nursing school in a small rural area, they can't travel to a major place to get training. So I think that's one area. I think on the other side of that, you're right. I think we as a simulation society and global simulation societies collectively need to come together to really have a shared message around the power of simulation education or experiential learning education, both for training and education for our students and our future workforce, and for patient and quality and safety. And so we have been thinking about that by the Society for Simulation Healthcare. We're working to potentially come up with a position statement that we hope we can work collaboratively and get endorsed by other organizations throughout the world to say, we as a community of simulation feel that it's critically important. There's evidence that we should be doing simulation in these areas. And then it's going to be up to each of the respective simulation societies to connect with government organizations within their local country to advocate those position statements and voice to those agencies, which can then provide funding policies that can then help out a broader audience. In the US, we're doing that. We actually have engaged with politicians, so some congressional representatives. We actually have language built in to our budget for the federal government budget for next year that if it doesn't get pulled out, we hope will support rural simulation training for all of our US-based rural communities. And so I think that advocacy locally is also very critical.
Muchas gracias, doctor. ¿Alguna otra pregunta o algún comentario? Doctor, agradecemos mucho su participación, el tiempo que nos ha brindado y sobre todo la experiencia con la que nos ha enriquecido el día de hoy. Y no cabe duda, ¿no? El reto que tenemos los educadores en simulación, los simulacionistas y los centros o laboratorios de simulación es grande, ¿no? No es nada más quedarnos en hacer la parte educativa, sino impactar en donde realmente es el eje medular de la educación a través de la simulación, ¿no? La seguridad del paciente. Entonces, tenemos un reto, los invitamos. Muchas gracias, doctor. Espero que continúe con nosotros disfrutando de este encuentro internacional de simulación clínica.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your time.